welcome up Stephen and Jake. You guys have the bio on Stephen. He's been in the startup community, helped run Startup 5 startups. He's consulted for organizations like Cisco, NBC. He's actually a graduate here of CMU and currently works with SIL International. And so all around the Bible translation world. And he's very focused. He oversees technology as the CIO there. And they're really pursuing how to implement AI. So I think Stephen has a lot to say for us as well. And then we've invited Jake, and I want to read you his bio. So Jake currently leads technology partnership at an organization called Session M, which is a company that runs consumer engagement and AI projects for some of the world's largest retailers and brands. Prior to Session M, Jake was the co-founder and COO of Loyaltree, a company acquired by Session M a few years ago. And before Loyaltree, Jake was the co-founder and CEO of another organization out of college that was also acquired. And so his world of startup, tying that into new technology, is very strong. And he's currently assembling a team of Christians here in Pittsburgh who work on some of the world's top organizations to say, how do we think on leveraging new technology and current technology and apply that to the missions world, and how do we live that out as Christians? So why don't we give a round of applause for these guys joining me. How would you define AI?
At the risk of being overly simple, I would say AI is a way to train computer software to think in certain categories for us. It's the process of training computer software to think in certain categories for us so that we can provide inputs to it and get outputs from it. So here's a piece of input, give me some particular, find me all the pictures with white cats in them in this stack of 8 billion pictures. I mean, humans could do that. It just takes a really, really long time.
As a non-technologist, I've had technology people try to explain this to me a lot. So the best example that they've given me to help me understand is a shift from if-then statements to yes and no, meaning that like how I would teach my son to know what a bus is. In an AI scenario, if my son points out the window and he sees a bus and he says, and my son's 2, so he says, bus, and I say, yes, that's a bus. He points to a truck. I say, no, that's not a truck, or that's not a bus. And, he points to a car, same thing, I say no. So out of these series of yeses and nos, he starts to actually learn what a bus is. And that's a shift from, instead of me saying like a bus is big and it has, a school bus is yellow, instead of defining it up front, like Steve said, it's more the computer learning. So, some of the advantages of that might be in computer vision, like if you're trying to learn what a stop sign is. In the old world, it might be, it has 8 sides, it's red, and it says stop. And some of the challenges you might see with that is if a branch is in front of the stop sign, then all of a sudden that's thrown out the window. So with AI, when it actually learns what a stop sign can look like in all scenarios, then it's, it's a much more robust solution. So that, as a non-technologist, that's the way it's been explained to me, and I can even understand that. So.
Another definition I've heard is artificial intelligence are computers imitating human thinking or behavior. And so that's been a helpful definition. Are there any other examples that we could use to continue to help us understand what this is?
Dialogue systems, so question-answer kinds of systems. So that's actually pretty applicable to people in this room where people are asking spiritual questions and AI systems can actually answer some of those questions. So for instance, we actually use a system that does this for us around one of our programs. We have people interacting with us in chat environments online. There's certain categories of questions that we just send right to the bot. The bot does the whole interaction, and we don't have to have a mountain of people doing that. And then if there's something happens along the way, it pops them out to a human, and the human takes over. Okay. So that kind of stuff.
Yep. And I don't know if we wanted to go here yet, but I think, we do a lot within retail, so we do a lot of these recommendation engines and customer journeys and product pairings for large organizations. And the people that we work with, I mean, they're just trying to increase revenue at their organizations. They're not out there to capture your data, steal it for the most part. So I think looking at, what people's intention, what their drivers are at their job, what they're trying to accomplish is a good way to not necessarily be scared about it. There's good people trying to solve problems with some of the technology that's out here, at least from what I've seen.
We're starting to see the use of more of these technologies. Let's use the chatbot example. Like maybe just unpack, Stephen, a little bit more of why you see the value in that, the use of a chatbot, for example, in answering spiritual questions.
I think so. So the way that we think about AI is not purely in the sense of automation, right? So we're not trying to replace humans. It's more augmentation. So, for instance, if I have a commercial website and I have thousands of customers or hundreds of thousands of customers, I know the 18 big questions most people are going to have. How do I get a refund? How do I do a return? All this kind of stuff. They don't need a human to give them basic stuff like that. But so we can define categories of interactions that the bot can just handle, and other categories where we say, no, this is beyond the scope of the bot. Give them a human and interact with that. And I think you may find that there are certain kinds of, particularly on the early ends of the funnel, where a lot of that interaction stuff could be augmented with something like a chat bot or a question and answer bot or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it in a similar way. I mean, it's like any tool, it could be good and bad. I mean, even the examples brought up today about facial recognition and deep fakes. Facial recognition is a little bit scary, but you can see examples where finding criminals could be a good thing. I believe the deep fake technology was originally developed to help people who couldn't speak have a voice. So I think like any other tool, it's a hard issue for the people that are using it. So I think that should be the focus more than attacking AI itself.
Well, take deep fake actually is a great example of something that can be used for good or evil. So we can all imagine what the evil uses of deep fake are, but let me give you a real practical good use of deep fake. So in a situation where you're creating a sign language translation of the Bible, one of the things that we've come to realize is that in the sign language community, a recording of Scripture is a person signing Scripture, right? And the person and the message get all wrapped up together. So when that person has a moral failure in the community, what happens to the Scripture, right? So what if you could use deep fake to swap that out for a generic persona that's not a particular person in the community? It looks like someone that could be from that community, but it's not a real person. And it so abstracts it a little bit and removes some of those particular risks. So that's an example of what I think could be an appropriate use of something that we all are kind of freaking out about right now.
There's going to be a lot of people, and I've talked to some of you already about this, which are like, why are we doing an AI thing? Like, this doesn't have anything to do with my role in my organization. I'm just going to blank out for that one, or I'm going to leave the room, and it's too much anyway. I'm just going to try to not deal with it or think about it. I'm later in my career, so I don't need to make any changes right now. Someone else will deal with that. These are all the things that are going on right now in our hearts. So what do we say to that? Because I'm convinced, like, the reason I am so passionate about us talking about this right now is because I see the impact that it can have and the opportunity it can have for the work we're doing and the importance for us to think about it deeply. So maybe let's start off with just an example. How are you guys at SL using this right now?
So we're doing a couple. So we talked about the chatbot thing. We're doing some autocomplete work. So one of our software products is a product called Keyman. It's a virtual keyboarding system. So if you're familiar with like Gboard or something like that, where you can swap out virtual keyboards, Keyman supports 1,000 languages. And a lot of the languages it supports are what I would call the languages of the long tail. They don't have a lot of content in them. And so a lot of the statistical machine translation stuff doesn't really work in those languages. But we still need a way to provide autocomplete suggestions so that those keyboards work a lot like the other keyboards. So that's one example. Another one, similar kind of problematic spot in the sense that these languages don't have a lot of content. So the idea of like Google Translate to translate Bible content in these languages, it simply doesn't work. There's no, we're actually creating the content in the language right now. So how do you use AI there? So one of the things that we do is we train the AI to match the style of the person who's doing the translator, so you can scale the translation team so that you don't get this thing that's like really weird style because you had 4 people involved in it. And so, yeah, so those are some examples of things. We've also used it to classify languages according to their level of digital support. So one of the things that we do is track all the world's 7,111 languages that people are using, and try to answer questions about how vital is the language? Is it being taught to kids and to grandkids? Is there technology support for that language? Are there keyboards and fonts and things like that? And so we've done some experimentation around
Can you
that.
just speak to for a second about the whole work of Bible translation and how, using AI, using new technology has shifted the game completely here and the impact that we're having? Because I know, from my understanding too, from what I'm hearing is, we had some targets on how we wanted all the languages, all Bible translated into every language. And now in the last 15, 20 years, that's been accelerating because of technology.
Yeah, I mean, it is accelerating both in terms of technology and technique, different approaches, cluster translation and things like that. Software integration is helping that as well. This is kind of out there. This is way on the edge. But if you wanted to do a typical machine translation approach on a language, usually what you would need to do is train the machine with a mountain of content in that language, and then say, okay, now translate this content from this language into that language. You can't really do that, in the languages that we're working in now, because there's no content that can be used to train the machine. But in the last 18 months or so, things like transfer learning and zero shot are sort of opening up some interesting possibilities. So here's the example. So someone took 50 translations of the Bible, 50 different languages, full Bible, and they took just the New Testament in English, okay? And then they used that to train a model. So the model now knows the full Bible in 50 languages and just the New Testament in English. And then they say, create a translation of Genesis 1 in English, based on what you know. And it was readable. Like you could understand what it meant.
Right.
So that starts to open up some interesting possibilities. How do we use that to augment the work that human translators are doing? Obviously, we want to be faithful to the scriptures. We want to make sure that it's natural in the way that it's in the way that it reads. We want to make sure that it's adoptable and acceptable to the community. So there's a lot of key dynamics that have to be true.
Yeah.
But what can that do to help us in the process? Could it be used for back translation work or things like that? So there's some interesting applications.
Right, and that could hyper accelerate the process.
Some
so
of
that
these
humans
some
can
of
look
these steps
at it.
are very time consuming. Back
Right.
translation, for instance, and that kind of thing.
That's awesome. Jake, I know you're working on a project right now as well.
Yep.
Exploring that. Why don't you unpack that a bit for us?
Yeah, so we have a group of guys here in Pittsburgh. It's still a side project. I'm still in the secular world, but hope to transition to where all of you are. And one of the opportunities that we saw, kind of to Frank's point about content creation, was that the value of sermon data. When you think about how many sermons are spoken, it's basically the volume of about almost 1 million books each year comes out of pastors' mouths. So there's this huge corpus of data, and we've started to think about what can we do with that data using semantic search, which is a new search technology within NLP. And one of our first use cases is kind of related to what we've talked about with the media today. Is we ask people, when you read an article, like a contentious article in the Wall Street Journal, CNN, Fox News, where do you go to validate your worldview on that particular article? And the overwhelming response is I go to the comments section, I go to Facebook to get affirmation that what I'm saying is right. I go back to Fox News or CNN, and it's created, I think, one of the most dangerous dynamics in culture, which is just how at everyone's throats we all are, depending on your worldview. Not many people say I go to Scripture to see what I should think about the border wall or North Korea. So one of the nice things about semantic search is that you can run an entire news article through this piece of machine learning and actually spit out, like, here's what pastors in your local area have said related to this news article. And the interesting thing, taking human intelligence connected to artificial intelligence, is that within those sermons, a lot of times those pastors are referencing Bible verses behind the scenes. So all of a sudden you're connecting news articles to Bible verses and how you should be praying. So we actually have our first prototype that came out last week. So it's kind of exciting to look at that. So we're incredibly excited about some of the possibilities. I think language is a huge area within the Christian area, just because there's so much content out there about the same general topic.
And that's such a good example to me because it ties in with what we just learned around media and content. And it's looking at the content you have and saying, what are the other things, the avenues we can get those to? But then how do we even take that content and figure out ways to tie it to the other things that already exist that we're trying to use and get the word out on? And this is where technology can really help. This is really helps. Okay, so our last, you want to say something else?
Yeah, so riffing on this, one of the things that AI can do today is keyword tagging in audio and video. So you run the article through the AI, and it says, well, here's what the pastors have said in the local area, and here's the part in the sermon where they start talking about that. Right, and jump you right to that. So it's useful all along the chain.
Which is very powerful too, because what do we do when we have any question ever now? Google. Right? We Google it, right? What's the second largest search engine in the world? YouTube. It's like we're going to video, we're going to this content, we're searching everything now.
Well, and Google's doing this. So I don't know if you've noticed, that you do a search on Google and it shows you the part in the video. So you can click on it and it just starts playing in the video right there. That's an example of it.
Interesting. So let's go to just the practical next thing. So let's say I'm here, I'm sitting here, I'm hearing everything you said. I think to some degree I'm convinced that artificial intelligence is important, that it's not going anywhere, that every organization in the world is exploring how to implement this. But look, I don't have a lot of resources here. I don't have a ton of money to do any of this. I don't know the first step to do. What's the one thing I could actually explore doing next with all of this information?
So I think many of the organizations in this room could do an experiment. But before you do the experiment, it'd be great if you could find someone who has some experience in machine learning or AI, and then tell them a little bit about some of the challenges in your organization, and see what ideas they come up with, and then do an experiment around that. That way, it's not just some experiment for experimentation purposes. It's related to some real world thing you're trying to do.
That's great. Jake?
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think, as Sean said in his talk yesterday, a lot of people are trying to find solutions for problems that aren't there. But I think everyone in this room has real problems. So I think this is the industry that I'm in. It's the MarTech space, which is companies that are trying to handle consumer engagement for a lot of retailers. So as you can see, you can't see anything because there's over 5,000 logos. And to give you an idea, like we're a very small logo on there, and our company's raised over $100 million. So there's an incredible investment in this space. And you may say, well, how do we compete with that? But echoing on Steve's point, I think there are a lot of Christians within these organizations that are out there. And if with your real problems, from my experience going and talking to some of these Christians about real problems in the mission area, I think they'll get really excited about helping to solve it. I know it was mentioned this morning, there are 4 self-driving car companies just here in Pittsburgh. So there are plenty of smart people that can help you with your challenges. I think the problem is the bigger thing. I think the end product is the bigger thing to think about. And then you can back into what the AI solution is pretty easily by talking to some of these people. It's not just saying, I want to throw AI in my organization.
Some people would tend to think, oh, I've got to have a whole giant team of data scientists and people who are wizards with AI. You don't. In fact, small companies like Hugging Face, for instance, are making a giant splash in their space. They have 5 people. So they're publishing articles, they're speaking at conferences, they're contributing to open source, and they're making stuff that's really commercially valuable. So you don't have to have a giant team. In fact, the AI and the machine learning aspects of this are actually quite small in terms of the overall technology projects. So you need a little dose of machine learning and AI skills and a bigger dose of just regular software development skills. And so it's really a matter of teaming your software developer up with somebody who really understands the particular machine learning or AI technology.
Yeah, and part of this, and why we're talking about this too, is the importance of educating ourselves and what's going on, so that we are aware of what's coming down the line. So why don't we thank Jake and Stephen for their time. Thanks, guys.